Good day, my relatives. Welcome to another program, Eagle and the Condor. And today, December the 10th, 2023, that is, also considered in the international community and by the United Nations having declared International Day for Human Rights, of Human Rights. And with that, my relatives, we need to keep faith in our solidarity with oppressed peoples and peoples who have a right to self-determination, such as what we're witnessing in this almost 2 months now of continuous bombardment there in Palestine on the West Bank and indeed in Gaza. And so we pray for peace and cease fire and make that ceasefire permanent and keep the children in mind in all our actions and always think 7 generations ahead, how we can even have that long vision to prepare for the emotions that are left behind through these years that will be a consequence to these actions, my relatives. But today also is a good day, and with that, I have a very good friend, a childhood, if you will, friend of mine named Moses Souza out in the San Joaquin Valley in Fresno. I want to give him a special shout out on his 75th birthday today. And I've known him since we were like 3, 4, 5 years old and on through junior high school and graduated from high school. We got drafted, my relatives, from Fresno on the same day as well. It's that kind of story in a way that I was mentioning to you the week before on the Veterans Day special here on Eagle and Condor that I hosted an interview with David Rodriguez, and I mentioned David Gomez, whom also left from Fresno with myself. We got drafted back in, I believe it was April, May of 1968. But a big embrace to my brother Moses Souza, who's gone through a lot to be where he's at today, a better person indeed, my relatives. And also I want to give a special land acknowledgement, if you will, my relatives, to the peoples of this land here, in particular, the Bay Area and here, San Francisco proper, the Muwekma Ohlone people, and of course, the Ramaytush peoples who are still present with us today, thank goodness, and learning the ways of their ancestors. Once again, that's that traditional knowledge that they are also sharing, as well as other indigenous tribals, traditional people sharing this knowledge to help sustain us in the years ahead, the generations ahead. We're headed for some very difficult times, and getting back to sustainable food products and learning these survival skills in line with our health and well-being is that long-range pursuit. So again, solidarity with Muwekma Ohlone peoples. And when we talk about land acknowledgement, my relatives, let's think even deeper into what's in motion already, and that is land back. Learning solutions of how to rejuvenate those places and territories that were also traditional lands to the peoples in those nearby cities and towns that we're living in. So keep that in mind, my relatives. And I do have a very special program. December is very special indeed in many ways. But historically, for indigenous peoples, there's a lot of tombstones, if you will, and actions that happen, particularly in the dead of winter, such as we're coming up to the anniversary of the massacre at Wounded Knee in South Dakota in 1890, my relatives. So After this week's program, very soon toward the end of the month, we'll put special emphasis to that massacre of 1890 of the Lakota Sioux peoples, over 300 men, women, and children, such as the massacre that we're witnessing, as I mentioned earlier, that occurred in 1890. And so with that, December also, we have a very good friend that I'd like to give acknowledgement to and a tribute and an honor to speak about the late, great Floyd Redcrow Westerman. His Indian name was Kanji Duta, which means Red Crow. And indeed, Floyd Redcrow left a big imprint in our lives. He was also the Minister of Cultura, Minister of Culture for the American Indian Movement. He was with the American Indian Movement from the inception, and many of its campaigns went on the road singing, playing his guitar, and playing songs, many of the songs even written by Vine Deloya, the great scholar of our times, who also passed away. Floyd passed away on December 13 at 71 years, but yes, indeed, he left a legacy, my relatives. With that being that special, also he's an actor. He was a man of all performances, a singer, activist of the first degree, eloquent speaker, a statesman. Floyd Redcrow was also a statesman, and everything was political for him, and he would say the music was just the vehicle for him to have the platform, and he used it very effectively. Some of you may recall Floyd Redcrow in Dances with Wolves. He was there right along with Kevin Costner and a cast of a lot of Indian peoples of Lakota, and the language by and large was in Lakota, one of the first movie productions of that kind. Floyd was involved in these movies. So today we're going to show two videos after my talk here with you today. The first will be Floyd Redcrow Westerman speaking at San Francisco State University in the Richard Oakes Room. This was in March of 2006, I believe. It's vintage, but the talk and the subject matter, the topic, rings true today, my relatives. And included with this talk that Floyd gave in the Richard Oakes Room at San Francisco State is another guest there of the American Indian Movement, and that is Vernon Bellecourt. His Indian name is Waban Inini. Waban Inini, and it means man of dawn. Vernon died at 75 years, I believe, in the same year as Floyd in 07. In fact, it was October 13 as well, on the day like Floyd on the 13th, but that was October 13 of 2007. A special request for your attention on how Vernon speaks of the movement. He was an international diplomat for the American Indian Movement, traveled to many countries and represented and brought many issues to the international arena, including the United Nations. So take a look there at Vernon, and sometime in the near future, I hope to have a video for you to see Vernon speaking about pictures that he and Dick Bancroft being the photographer, but both talking about a multitude of pictures of the American Indian Movement. So I believe it's called Hanta Ho in Ojibwe, but that would be with Vernon Bellecourt, who was Ojibwe himself. So let's take I look at these videos that we're bringing to you, my relatives, and then the other film that I wanted to bring to your view and attention is called Exterminate Them, a California Story. And this was produced by Floyd Redcrow Westerman himself, and he does the narration, and it's very explicit in the history that went on here in California, the colonization and the brutality and the land theft that ensued, and much of that land, hardly any has been returned to indigenous peoples. But that's for the long struggle, and the film is to bring to your attention the plight of these peoples under manifest destiny and white supremacy, racism, all of that Floyd narrated in that film, my relatives. So take a listen on that, my relatives, and tell your friends about Eagle and the Condor, Sundays, 4 o'clock here at Bayvac Media, Channel 29, and you can listen, watch it live streaming, also at sfc.tv, live streaming there. That's the Bayvac Media channel, sfc.tv, or you can go to the AIM West website at aim-west.org, and that too is live streaming. Scroll down for Eagle and the Condor. That's Sundays at 4 o'clock, my relatives. I also want to mention the KPFA radio station in Berkeley, which I also host with rotating people on Bay Native Circle, and you can get that at KPFA 94.1 FM, Wednesdays from 7 to 8. And also again with KPFA radio, this public radio, my relatives, we need to take advantage of that. From the ground up, the voices of the people are heard there. And so it is with La Onda Bajita show. That's on Fridays from 8 to 10 o'clock. And I have a segment there across Indian land, the second and the third Fridays of each month, my relatives. And finally, my relatives, Leonard Peltier, let's keep him in mind during these holy days ahead. He's been in prison now 48 years, and his health is deteriorating. Only one person can release him, and that's President Joe Biden. Call him at the White House, area code 202-456-1111, and call for executive clemency. Leonard Peltier needs to be home now. All right, my relatives, thank you for your time. Let's go into those two videos, and we'll see you once again on Eagle and the Condor.
Reenactments that would have really been very harsh and strong. But anyway, I kept it to a sense of storytelling. And it seems to be able to go across with a lot of people. I did have some white Americans say, oh, that smallpox blankets must have happened by accident. There's real denial. I don't want to accept biological warfare was taking place in such a big way. This country did all that long before Hitler. Hitler praised this country in his book, Mein Kampf. There was a history program on recently about history's lost book, Hitler's lost book. He wrote Mein Kampf, and then he wrote another one, and it's a lost book, and they found it. And in there, he praised America and envied America for what they were able to do to take this land from a people, many Indian nations, and create what would later become this tyranny that we live under called America. The American Indian movement is basically a liberation struggle of that. And from there on, I'd like to turn it over to Vern to finish out, and Tony here, who's been our man in Geneva for many years, working on the human rights issues. But Tony just got a liver transplant. I got a lung transplant. Well, we're all going for Indian parts here. Our cars are worn out, now we are. Anyway,
the last quote that Redcrow used here, I think it's very key to where the United States is again today in Guatemala or in Iraq and of course Afghanistan. And I always have Guatemala in my mind, and I'll get to that in a moment. But as you're all aware, Harry Belafonte, who's probably is one of the most respected, beloved African American in the country, who's been a tremendous voice for all of us, seized the opportunity while he was visiting Venezuela. And it was a historical event that took place in Venezuela and Bolivia, in that Brother Hugo Chavez, who comes from the indigenous and African stock, would become the president of Venezuela. The International Treaty Council here, and Tony and Jimbo and Bill Means and others who are carrying on the work, they're the international political and diplomatic core of the American Indian movement. And they have, at the United Nations, worked with another great leader, Presidente Evo Morales in Bolivia. We believe strongly that Evo Morales is a manifestation of the struggle that was launched by another great revolutionary who was martyred by the CIA in Bolivia, Che Guevara. And that the seeds that he planted there, the revolutionary spirit, even though in some cases he didn't have the support of the local indigenous groups, played a very important role in that. And so when Belafonte was singing Deo, Deo, midnight coming, I want to go home, and loading the banana boats, he was one of the greatest people beloved by all. But the minute he started to speak the truth about what this particular administration represents, he became the target of the right-wing journalists, and I'll explain that term, right, and the conservative right-wing evangelical Christians, who in many cases are like the good German people who did not speak out against the tyranny of the Nazis and the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler. We have the same cheering section here, cheering George Bush on. And when Belafonte said he's the biggest terrorist in the world, he was absolutely correct. And of course, he was strongly criticized for it. I'm going to ask you again, and I hope that some of you are taking notes, but if you went to our website, aimovement.org, or if you go to the search engines and look for the Guatemala Human Rights Commission, and go to a document entitled Memory of Silence, the Historical Clarification Commission report that is well documented in what they call the 36-year-old Civil War, which really wasn't a civil war. The whole thing was provoked by John Negroponte, who now holds a big post in security or something, national security, and Elliott Abrams, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for Central America Affairs. They, in fact, two persons who were continuing waging war against the people of Central America. And in this case, the Mayan Indians in Guatemala, of which Rigoberta Menchú, as the 1992 Nobel Peace Prize winner. She will always say that her teacher was Bill Means and the work she did with the International Indian Treaty Council. So we know when we make representations that we understand that it's factual. And if you would go to that document, and it's called Memory of Silence, the Historical Clarification Commission report on the genocide that took place in Guatemala. Now, Rigoberta Menchú reports to us that more than 350,000 Mayan Indians have been butchered, brutalized, tortured, murdered, raped. Villages destroyed, 400 and some. Guatemala Mayan Indian villages destroyed with the whole populations assassinated. Hundreds, if not thousands, were taken into the torture chambers of the death squad governments of Lucas Garcia Romero and Ephraim Rios Montt, who was a born-again evangelical Christian, and when he was singing Hallelujah under the tent, his battalion was out slaughtering whole villages of Mayan people. Now, this isn't what the Spaniards did hundreds of years ago. Those deaths intensified tenfold under the administration of George Bush Sr. And eventually, as you're well aware, he lost the election, and Bill Clinton came into power. And this is what he said of a campaign that started probably intense under Presidents Simpson, Johnson, Nixon, Kennedy, and of course George Bush Sr. So this was in the last 15, 20 years we're talking about. This is an ancient history. People always say, Americans will always say, well, we're not responsible for the crimes of our ancestors. But that's a big cop-out. Because Americans today, more than ever, have a responsibility to speak up. It's very critical. And I'll tell you why. Here's what Bill Clinton said. Washington was wrong to have supported Guatemala security forces in a brutal counterinsurgency campaign that slaughtered thousands of civilians. He went on to say, it is important that I state clearly that support for military forces or intelligence units who engage in violent and widespread repression of the kind described in the report of the Historical Clarification Commission was wrong. Clinton went on to say, reading carefully from handwritten notes, and the United States must not repeat that mistake. It is because of the United States' support for a series of military death squad governments in Guatemala that at least 350,000 Mayan Indians and tens of thousands other Guatemalan civilians lost their lives. At least 467 villages have disappeared. Men, women, and children have been brutalized, tortured, raped, mutilated, and buried in mass graves throughout the countryside of Guatemala in the last 15 years. I think what's important here is what has changed since the history of California, which was a history all across this country. Now, during in the aftermath of the fall of the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, there were what was called the Nuremberg tribunals. And you can go on the website and go to the Nuremberg tribunals. There are several files, several writers that have written on the subject. There are a list of the war criminals that were in the docket in the Nuremberg trials, and of course Redcrow in the Final Thoughts talks about what the German people were protesting their innocence by pleading ignorance. German military officers were saying they're only following orders. But those orders were to turn Nazi German youth into goose steppers, shock troops, and stormtroopers. So they turned. We see that happening again with our young people dying and being murdered and crippled on the battlefields of Iraq. So there's not much that changed. During the Nuremberg war crimes trials, there were people like Heinrich Himmler, Heydrich, Speer, Donitz, Rudolf Hess, Goring, Kaltenbrunner, just to name a few. And what we see today and what Harry Belafonte said, that Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld, Rice, Powell, General Franks and General Myers, and a lot of other officers, such as was the case with the Gestapo and the stormtroopers of the Third Reich. We've seen the emergence, we're watching the emergence of the Fourth Reich. What's the difference between Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and the reservation concentration camps and the concentration camps of Europe under the Third Reich? And when Harry Belafonte said and made parallels between Adolf Hitler and George Bush, let's not beat around the bushes on this one. He was also a reincarnation of Colonel Armstrong Custer and the same cavalry units and mercenaries that did this horrendous crime against us. One of the first victims was, what was Piestewe's first name, the Hopi girl?
Lori.
Huh? Lori Piestewe. A Hopi woman, left 2 children. Sheldon Eaglehawk of Cheyenne River, or Hawk Eagle, one of the two, was the second, almost the first Indian to lose his life, and several have lost their lives. So these are young people of all of our families that were told you can be all you can be. You get a scholarship, you get an education. They didn't tell them that they could be dead also. And why are we wasting the youth of America, turning them into panzer units with their tanks, shock troops, stormtroopers? We're going into homes in Iraq, terrorizing whole families, killing their children, killing their elders. And then they say they're real humanitarians because they brought a Iraqi child over here and they showcase her. What despicable people. They will not, they'll stoop to anything to make it believe that they're real compassionate. And they're slaughtering Iraqi men, women, and children right now, at this moment. And then Bush, who's trying to rise out of the quagmire, as most of us heard of a young man who's autistic that's on a basketball team up in the Northeast. This person would actually set up a photo op, and he told us all in the world that when he seen this young man score 20 points in 5 minutes, sure, you know, we all like that. But George Bush says he wept. Did he weep for any of the young men and women that come home in the caskets? The 30,000 that have lost their legs and their eyesight? Has he shed a tear for them? Has he shed a tear for the 100,000 at least Iraqis, men, women, and children, that have been incinerated with their US weapons of mass destruction? And we have a responsibility, as the German people didn't take the opportunity. They're criticized today for not stopping Adolf Hitler. And the very least we can do is try to stop the birth of the Fourth Reich. It's still in its infancy, but it's very dangerous. You know, they got Guantanamo. They got the rendition program, secret prisons where they're torturing people. That's not new. That's the nature. You know, when they say American family values, yeah. The majority of Americans are honorable people, want peace. But they're standing on the sidelines. They don't know what to do. Oh, I, one person, can do nothing. I hope that you were part of the 25, 30,000 yesterday that said we're trying to do something to stop it. We accept the challenge. And yes, George Bush, you're absolutely right when you said, if you're not with us, you're against us. We're not with them, and we're not with them, and we're for damn sure against them. And we all should be against them, and we have to join our voices by the millions across this country to stop it. If not, one day we're going to be asked the same question. What did you do at this time in history? I think we all have to think about that. Be great.
Also get into some questions. Also, before we get into that, I just want to say maybe one of our student interns here from San Francisco State, Sonia, maybe she can do a mailing list, get an email, get a list going around, help us out in that way. If there's any questions.
Can I say one more before the questions? There's an email and phone number if anybody wants to get in on making the curriculum of the Holocaust. We've got many students and scholars to pitch in and plan the story of the Holocaust under this phone number here and reach this Dr. Mariana Ferriera. There's her email. Anybody who'd like to punch that up, be part of our next meeting, we're going to plan the curriculum for teachers to teach the Holocaust. And you can really educate yourself on what we're doing too, because we're going to start moving all over the country with this Holocaust story. So take that with you. Okay, Jimbo.
Anybody have any questions or? Yes.
I have one for Floyd. Correct me if I'm wrong, is it a Lakota Sioux prophecy about the year 2012 where the red man becomes white and the white man becomes red? Is that part of the Lakota Sioux prophecy?
Actually, you ever heard this one? You know, that's about the first time I really had that. This that the red man becomes white, white, red, because there's something too, if you look at that whole question, it's that long ago, Neihart, who was an anthropologist, did a book on blackout. At that time, he wrote the book in the early 40s and 50s. It came out. He thought that this religion would sweep the world because it was a religion of great spirituality and comment on the earth. And he finished the book, and Americans, it even sell here, and Americans were still thought that Indians were savages and had nothing about their thinking. And Black Elk wrote that book. And anyway, Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, read it in Germany, and he said, this is a worthy statement. And he published the book in Germany, and it sold millions in Germany. Then it bounced back and reflected back here. And a lot of people now are, there's a whole thing called New Agers now, too. That's the one, the whites that became red.
For the most part,
Traditional Indians to be able to keep it in a good place so that that doesn't happen. And we ask all people not to do these ceremonies if you're not of that culture. You can experience them, you can witness them, but sometimes the inner sanctum, you have to show respect. And respect is to show distance. You don't just jump right in there like some have.
I'd like to say something. What you referred to, there's also something about Hopi prophecy and seventh generation. And I would hope that the students here and the rest of our people don't allow those stories and what is expected there to be corrupted or there is, with some of the channelers, the Matter of channelers and the New Agers, they're talking about the year 2012. And for some, as I go to many meetings, and I start hearing a crossover, and they start talking about the Hopi prophecy in seventh generation, along with the year 2012 and the things that are being channeled. So just do some research, and there is a Hopi prophecy out there.
It's also an Aztec prophecy. It's also an Aztec prophecy.
Right.
Yeah. If you look at all those, and the time we live in, you can almost see what's developing. And certain people are sliding into the corporate world and they don't ask questions to get out of the box. There's a whole group of people who are mindful of a different direction of how to live on Earth. All of that, I believe, has to do with the values of life that Indian people have. It was said long ago that our ways would be a blessing to a sick society. And I think that's what's emerging to the top, is that the values of life that you live with Earth will be that blessing. That's the Indian point of view on that. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something and then maybe you could comment. The genocide of indigenous people continues today throughout the world. And I just witnessed it for 3 weeks in Chiapas. I just came back 2 days ago. And I was with a group that helps support the Zapatistas to be strong and healthy. And I don't know, maybe some of you people have been there, but it's a remarkable experience to go there because the native Mayan people in the countryside are living the same way that they lived 500 years ago. And everywhere we went in the countryside, they were waving and happy, and they had so little, but what little they had, they shared. And there's peace campers from Europe. They're living with them in their villages, the ones that have called themselves Zapatista villages, to protect them against the paramilitary. So the vigilantes are still there, and they're hassling them and would probably kill them if they weren't being protected in some ways. But whether it's Guatemala or Chiapas, it's a total disrespect for centuries of native peoples, and where you really are our teachers. You are people of the earth, and we've become people of the machine, and we've lost our senses. So thank you for keep educating us.
Well, I think the song about the Zapatistas fits at this time. Zapatista, you can hold your head up high. You have given back the freedom. You have lived up to your name. Zapatista, may the soldiers disappear. May your children live forever. May their laughter fill your life. Zapatista, keep believing in the dream. Light a candle in the darkness. You're the keeper of the flame. Zapatista, you can hold your head up high. You have given back their freedom. You have lived up to your name. Zapatista, may the soldiers disappear. May your children live forever. May their laughter fill your life.
quite a few minutes here. I also want to recognize Tony for being here. Some of you know that he's been through some health issues and he's back in recovery. And I want to ask him if he has a few words to offer.
Thank you. I want to welcome everybody here, taking the time and the effort to join with us in this sacred building, the sacred room, in memory of Richard Oakes, a great activist here in the Bay Area, and helped us all kick it off what we're living through today with his leadership at Alcatraz in '69. The whole world woke up and we're beginning to see some of those achievements, with presidents that were referred to earlier in South America, and the participation of American Indian movement as a catalyst to raise that consciousness worldwide, and moved our organization, the International Indian Treaty Council, to that international arena under the Economic and Social Council. I'm sure many of you have been reading the paper about the UN itself going through reformation, through revision. It's a 60-some-year-old structure that now has to fit into the new politic and geography of the world community, whereas the UN, in its charter signed in 1945, was approximately 55 countries, predominantly white European, and today there's over 190. So there are indeed major changes to be made, but for Indian people like ourselves, and having gotten directly involved in 1974 through our application for status within the UN ECOSOC system, is like just when we got the rules straightened out and right, now they're going to change the game. So one of the biggest bodies within the UN system, that we would take human rights violations and fundamental freedoms, including the topic in our communities and that of self-determination, is now being reconsidered. And the Commission on Human Rights, as it was called, starting on Monday, will meet for only 1 week in Geneva, Switzerland, as the Human Rights Council. And thereafter, they will be meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, or it's not yet determined whether New York or Geneva, Switzerland, and on a quarterly basis at that. And Indigenous peoples, for example, we will, won't have any real connection thereafter either with the Economic and Social Council. So there's a lot of changes going on within the international community and at the UN in many directions. But I believe that a lot of the world consciousness, not only about the condition of our sacred mother, the earth, and the animal world, but the suffering of indigenous people throughout, was raised consciously by the desperate and militant position that American Indian movement had to take beginning in '73, but there were steps leading up to that, including Alcatraz and the leadership of Richard Oakes. So for that we have great thanks, and both Floyd and Vernon's discussion and what we have to say tonight and in the past, you can look us up in our website to know what it is we do exactly at the UN. And Rigoberto Menchú is also the Nobel Prize winner, she's one of our board members. So I don't know, I'll write up there our website so you can all jot it down and take a look for yourself.
I have just a closing.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Go.
I have a closing comment. I think is appropriate to remind Americans of one of their heroes, and a man that had tremendous respect from the indigenous community, of course, the brother of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. Recently, his son was speaking to a group of Indian leaders, I think it was up in North Dakota, or maybe it was Montana. And he reminded them that his dad, Robert Kennedy, always recognized that the greatness of America would not be truly reached until the wrongs that were done to the American Indians were righted. Bob Dylan pretty much said the same thing, that until America rights itself with the American Indian, they will never be right. And that's a good, powerful message from both Robert Kennedy and Bob Dylan.
We're gonna have a honor song, but first I would like to ask my brother, my auntie, they're all standing out to make a final prayer. If we could all stand together. That's the spirit like that. You hear that song over the hill or distance, and one of the cavalry guys, soldiers, said, "You know, I don't like the sound of that drum." And a voice came from the bushes and said, "That's not our regular drummer."
I'd like for us to acknowledge, if I can take the liberty of introducing Richard Williams from the community and from California himself, if he would share maybe some words in closing in memory of our peoples and the great sacrifice of California Indian people as well.
Excuse me, what's the question?
You want to share some words?
If you're an indigenous to California, would you acknowledge your thoughts on the California Indian struggle?
Maybe a prayer.
Prayer.
Well, thank you for all your good words for my people. I'm still I appreciate all your words for my ancestors, and I'm still I'm glad because I met on lost relatives. I found out that this last weekend, after when I first slept for over a year because of my problems, I ran into a second cousin that I didn't know I had. I found out that she was sister to my great grandmother. I mean, our great grandmothers were sisters.
Oh. Right.
And she was in the same sweat lodge with me, so I didn't know that until later.
That's what it brings the spiritual brings it all back around.
Yes, and so I found out that we played the same places, but at different times, and so we have long ties. And so brought back a lot of memories. And I'm still aglow from that.
Oh,
And I brought back a lot of memories, and what you said here warms my heart. And I know of all the things you said about it because I'm a student of my own history, and I'm still focused on the future, and I'm trying to come to terms with that myself.
you are Miwok?
I'm Yurok and Karuk.
You're
When I'm a doctor in Togo, and I follow the sunglasses.
all right.
Thank you.
But who is it that lives around Santa Fe? Which Indian nation is there? Miwok. You know, the Miwok, there's such a land theft going on in the whole northern Marin County. The Catholic Church ripped all that land from the Indian people, forced the Indians into stockades and encampment, and then everybody just homesteaded in the hills of Marin County, and that has never been settled. The Miwoks have a tremendous case against California to take that whole Bay Area back. It's never been taken to court, so one day this will all come up again.
My tribe has a lot of Hurons, so
Yes, everybody went through a mass land theft situation there. Okay, well, it's been a good circle, and I really appreciate being here with my brothers, and She's here. That, you know, the circle begins here, it goes out. I have a feeling that a lot of people were not meant to see the direction of what's going on, the real light, in a sense. Not all people are going to see that. We were told long ago we would see America come and go. And when you look at things around, be very sensitive about what you're hearing. And what you're hearing is either truth or lies. And mostly lies from the TV, that's what you're getting. So beware of what's happening out there, because the opposite side of that is this Indian circle, which is very powerful and strong. It may be small, but it's there. I don't think people really understand that connection. But all of you, I know, sense something here. There is something going on in this world that's got more to do with just economic survival. There's something else. And it's got a lot to do with tsunamis and how much water each area of the continent will be affected by the spirit of the water. And how Earth is changing like that. And these things will force man into another kind of survival. It can take everything away, and it's about survival.
Good evening.
All right, so thank you, Washte, thank you very much, Jim, for arranging this.
Hello, my name is Floyd Redcrow Westerman. I'm of the Dakota Sioux Nation. It is my honor to present segments from the first installment of an important new docu-series called America's War on Indian Nations. What happened to the indigenous peoples of this country is much like the Jewish Holocaust. Only America's ethnic cleansing was at the hands of people who would later claim innocence in the name of God, freedom, and democracy. Historians have been reluctant to use the word Holocaust to describe the taking of the land and the shaping of America. Instead, they use rhetoric like the new frontier, or claim that the Indians were savage after all, or describe it as manifest destiny. Manifest destiny means that the taking of the land was not only justified, but ordained by God. Most schools in America still teach this feel-good version of history. America's War on Indian Nations tells another side of the story. This series will tell the truth about gross injustices and rampant human rights violations inflicted upon an entire culture. Early-day Europeans who came to America were commissioned to look for gold. With gold, the objective meant that nothing would stand in their way. State by state, various tools of genocide were employed in what became a systematic clearing of the land. The first of these tools was the bullet. The bullet was used to kill many millions of my people. Another tool of genocide was the smallpox-infected blanket. To Indians, the blanket was a dominant trade item. To give a blanket was a gesture of respect. Knowing this, early Americans distributed smallpox blankets in order to exterminate and eradicate the existing population. Those who survived this early form of biological warfare were removed by organized government-funded militias and more bullets. Imagine being in your home having dinner with your family when suddenly armed intruders break in and shoot your parents, take your children, burn your house, the children to be later used as servants and sex slaves. And if you survive that, to be rounded up like cattle and put on death marches to remote locations far from your homeland and put on reservations, a nicer term for what they really were, concentration camps. This horrific scenario is what happened to thousands and thousands, if not millions, of Indian people. For my ancestors, the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, this policy of concentration camp lifestyle was in effect from 1890 to 1930. For 40 years, my people were prohibited by law from leaving the reservations. The ethnic cleansing was effective. It is estimated that when Columbus arrived, there were approximately 20 million Indians in America. By the end of World War II, only 500,000 remained. This means that complete extermination was nearly accomplished. Listen to the words of some of the founding fathers of this country. George Washington, revered as the father of this country, wrote, and I quote, "Indians were wolves and beasts who deserved nothing from the whites but total ruin." Thomas Jefferson, acclaimed proponent of freedom and democracy, argued that the United States government was obliged, and I quote, "to pursue Indians to extermination or to drive them to new seats beyond our reach." Andrew Jackson, founder of the modern Democratic Party and the greatest Indian killer of all American presidents, urged United States troops, and I quote, "to rout out from their dens and kill Indian women and their whelps." It is a great irony that American Indians, after being denied for many years their right to practice their own religion, speak their own languages, after being forced to live in the oppressive concentration camp lifestyles, after all that, Indians have gone on to become staunch defenders of this country in times of need. More Indians have received the Congressional Medal of Honor per capita than any other group of people. We remain a proud people in spite of the efforts to exterminate us. In order to heal, we first must accept our past. And now, excerpts from Part 1, Exterminate Them, the California Story. In 1851, the first governor of California, Peter Burnett, wrote in a subsequent inaugural speech that a war of extermination will be waged between the two races until the Indian race becomes extinct. And in 1850, the first legislature of California enacted a law under the guise of protecting Indians, titled An Act for the Government and Protection of Indians. In Section 20 of the law, it defined vagrant Indians and prescribed their punishment. It stated that any Indian able to work and support himself, who shall be found loitering and strolling about or frequenting public places, shall be liable to be arrested on the complaint of any resident citizen of the county. For, and I quote, champions of the Christian faith to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. The following is a story of what happened in California.
Right after the conquest of the Valley of Mexico, a debate erupted whether Indians were human beings or not. Philosophers and scholars in Spain argued that they were natural-born slaves, not capable of understanding the complexities of Catholicism and Christianity. See, Spain based their ownership and the right to do this on something called a papal bull of 1493, the year after Columbus discovered the New World for Europe. The Pope said, okay, Spain gets to have North America and part of South America, and Portugal gets the rest. So by the swipe of a pen, we have a Pope giving away our property.
When they entered here, I think it was the beginning of the end of the Cahuilla people here as far as our culture went, because everything was destroyed by them. When they brought cattle in here, thousands of cattle and horses and things, and they destroyed the very food that was for the Indian people. This is never written anywhere. There's never told how they suffered in their own land.
But probably the most devastating was the introduced diseases. And we're talking about children's diseases like measles, mumps, chickenpox, not even to mention the horrendous ones like smallpox and diphtheria, venereal diseases. And people became afraid. Their children were sick and dying. In all epidemic diseases, it is the children and the elders who die first. Sadly, kind of a situation where your past and your future are dying right before your eyes.
In the spring of 1769, Father Junipero Serra, accompanied by the Spanish military, sailed into San Diego Harbor and established California's first mission. Over the next 50 years, the Spaniards built 20 other missions along the coast to colonize the land and pacify the Indians. When Father Serra arrived, there were approximately 340,000 Indians in California. By the turn of the century, only 17,000 remained.
And then when they started the missions here, well, that was worse yet, because they were all Indian slaves that built those missions. And I remember my father was telling me one time, he said, you know, his great-great-uncle and his uncle before that, his great-great-uncle was telling them that he was one that was kidnapped and taken into one of the missions.
They went to church every day. They had routines of prayers and labor every day. And Floyd, remember this, most of these Indians could not speak Spanish. The Mass is delivered in Latin. At several missions, explorers came by and reported, English and French explorers reported that the Indians are made to kneel on the tiles. There was no benches. They're made to kneel on the tiles and remain motionless during the entire Mass, by the way, with armed guards with fixed bayonets at the corner. This is not the image that we have of the missions that you go to and visit today.
They were forced to listen, forced to be there.
They had no choice. They had no choice, and they would be punished if they did not go there. If they ran off, they were not allowed to run off.
And I don't know how, by luck, he got a run away from there again and went home. And he said, you know what they are doing to our people? And the people were wondering, and he said, they made us do this, and he would kneel down, and if we didn't do that, they'd whip us, and you had to become that, or otherwise you're going to be killed. And we had to make that with the cross. He didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know anything about it. Then they were whipped, and they were not given any food. They had to be hungry all the time. He said, that's what they're doing to my people over there.
There have been very careful studies done of the Spanish records, looking at the kind of food that the Indians were being given, and calculating the number of calories per day that they were probably receiving. On average, it's less than 1,000 calories a day. In many missions, the numbers they figured somewhere between 600 and 700 calories per day. Let me put this in some context. On slave plantations in the South, the field slaves working in the fields were getting, according to contemporary analyses, approximately 4,000 to 4,500 calories a day. Now, that's a lot of calories, but it's a lot of calories because you're working like a slave. You need that kind of caloric intake in order to do slave labor. Mm-hmm. The Indians were doing slave labor also, but they're getting 600 and 700, maybe 1,000 calories a day.
That's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. They're starving to death. They're working them to death and starving them to death. Make another comparison. In the final year or so of the Buchenwald concentration camp in Nazi Germany, there again have been calculations of the amount of caloric intake that the inmates received. It was around 600 to 700 calories a day. That's, I can't remember exactly, something like a cup of milk and a little and a piece of bread or something. That is what the people in the missions were getting year after year after year, decade after decade after decade. They were literally being starved.
But I think it's important also, Floyd, that we acknowledge that these Indians weren't just victims, as they responded in numerous ways. The very first mission here in San Diego was attacked within the first 2 weeks of the arrival of the Spanish, and in 1775 a force of nearly 1,200 local Kumeyaay Indians sacked and burned Mission San Diego. They didn't have a convert here for 2 years.
Having survived the Spanish onslaught, the worst was yet to come. In 1848, gold was discovered in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Settlers and immigrants flooded into the region from the east. For the second time in less than a century, California Indians encountered a people who claimed to have divine right to their land. This time, the resulting genocide was in the name of manifest destiny.
In the process of searching for this gold, the attitude for the Native people at that time was honed to precision. And that was the mentality of nits make lice. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. And this thing standing between America and progress had to be erased somehow.
They went all over California, from the Siskiyou Alps all the way south into the Cuyamacas here in San Diego County. They worked everywhere, and they disrupted Indian lives everywhere they went. It was an entirely lawless situation. Floyd, there was undescribable violence towards the Indian people. Indian children were stolen, little girls were made into sex slaves, little boys into servants, parents were murdered, Indian villages were burnt down, principally at the hands of militias. These militias were just organized gangs of killers that went out without any legal authority.
Even the military at times couldn't stand the assault of the vigilantes on the Native people, and sometimes they'd stop that, but very often, and too often, they'd turn the other way.
And it was like that all over, even up in Northern California. They would give them poisoned roast cattle and things, and the Indian people just died left and right. They hunted their heads. They paid so much for Indian head, $50 to $10, whatever. They were all, you always had to bring in the head of the Indian that you killed. That's what they did to the people here in California.
This went on for the first 2 years of the gold rush at such an intense pace that 100,000 Indians died in the first 2 years of the gold rush. Floyd, nothing like this happened anywhere else in North America. Nothing like this was comparable to the loss of life and the utter chaos and violence of the gold rush.
If that's what is perpetrated by civilians, it's very much like ethnic cleansing at its height in this country.
It's one of the uglier chapters of ethnic cleansing in North American Indian history, and probably stands in world history as an outstanding example of the cruelty of human beings to one another.
When gold played out, the slaughter continued as attention shifted to ownership of the land. Echoing the sentiment of the public, the press called for the extermination of the red man.
When the military and the volunteers, the guards and the Pitt River Rangers, they had several different names for the people in California who organized on their own to go out and basically kill Indians and help the military clear the land.
One of the most disturbing things that I ever came across in the documentation was the inaugural address of California's first governor, when he declared that a war of extermination would be made against the Indians until the Indian race is extinct. We've got a classic example of the head of a modern state endorsing genocide.
Sometimes when we hear the word Stanford, we think, boy, that's the best university there ever was, and it may be. But when Leland Stanford was the governor of California, the militia out there killing Native people, they got paid in rifle, powder, and ball for killing Indians. That was their reward.
The militias were financed at first by local merchants who simply saw an advantage of getting rid of the local Indians. Then they would submit the bill to the state legislature. Since the state legislature had barely formed, and they were clamoring for protection against Indian depredations, as they called it, the state legislature paid them back and then sent the bill to the federal government. And the federal government reimbursed eventually over $1.5 million for militia campaigns against Indians. Now, the great tragedy in this is that this becomes a form of subsidized murder.
The townspeople of Eureka decided that they wanted to take it. And one night, February 26, 1860, they came quietly, silently. They left their guns at home, and they brought clubs and hatchets. They came while they were sleeping, and the men were gone, and they killed the women and children and the elders. So the island is bloody. And there was a baby found on that island in 1860, the morning of, after the massacre took place. And that baby was Jerry James, and he was my great-great-grandfather.
It was public policy to take my scalp. It was public policy to take my ear. Public policy even to take my head and sell it to California's government for $5. We're standing at this rock here where it says Bloody Island, scene of a battle between the U.S. soldiers under command of Captain Lyons and Indians under Chief Augustine. This battle that they're calling was actually a massacre of our people here on Belafonte. And it started with these two men from the Sonoma area called Charles Stone and Andrew Kelsey. They bought some land from Vallejo, General Vallejo, and came up here and brought their cows and settled in the area over there by Canactai, the town that they call Kelseyville now. They treated the Indians real bad. They would enslave them. They made them build fences around their own village so they couldn't go hunting or gathering. And they wanted complete control. They would tell the parents, bring your little girls to our house, Stone and Kelsey. And the parents would, and if they refused, they would get hung in a tree and they would get whipped and left there all night for punishment. They were treated so bad and starving that they went and killed Charles Stone and Andrew Kelsey. And for killing them, Ben Kelsey heard about it, and he got 15 vigilantes together, which one of the vigilantes was the governor of California, William Boggs. There was lawyers, there were businessmen. I mean, it was just, regular citizens got together and they came over here just to kill and revenge what happened to Andrew Kelsey and Charles Stone.
One of the few survivors of this massacre was Lucy Moore, the great-grandmother of Clayton Duncan.
The reason why she survived was because of a game that the kids played around here in the Tules, a hide-and-go-seek game. They would take a reed and they would hide under the water and breathe through this reed while, they would be hiding. And it was kind of hard to, find a little brown kid in a bunch of Tules, breathing through the reed under the water. And so she knew that game. And when this battle happened, when this butchering happened, well, that's what she done. She took this reed. Her mother told her to get a reed. She got under the water and she started breathing through the reed, and that's how she survived.
Many of the people who survived were forced onto reservations or sold into slavery to provide free labor in the mines and on the ranches. Over 4,000 children were bought and sold at markets at prices ranging from $60 for a boy to $200 for a girl. Enslaved women and girls were sold for higher prices because the miners and ranchers used them for forced sexual labor.
The California state government paid $1 million for scalping missions in 1851 and 1852. Militias were paid $5 for a severed Indian head in Shasta in 1855, and 25 cents for a scalp in Honey Lake in 1863.
One of the things that my father always talked to me about was when most of the Cahuilla people were almost destroyed completely here, when Chief Juan Antonio protected the non-Indians and fought for them, and he realized that we would never defeat the white man that was coming in. He realized that, and he didn't want his people to die. And then he helped those people and protected them. In turn, the army sent in infected smallpox blankets, and he killed about 60% of the Cahuilla people at that time.
other records, and where would
Yes, you know, this is one of the things. I belong to the Riverside Historical Society, and after I got out of there, my brother took place, and my brother and I and my family still speak the language, and he took over and he found out what happened. They said, you know what, this is what they did to Juan Antonio and all of my people, and they said, oh no, that has to be documented before we can really put it out. So they went and looked over it, and they got in Washington, it is documented that they did send their blankets here, the army blankets, to the people here.
Was there the documented form of letters, military records? I think
so, yes. They went through that, and that's why they have that plaque now right there by the rest area to Juan Antonio. And then my brother put that up with the help of all the people that belong to that historical society in Riverside.
We are we are
You ask me about what kind of people could do the kinds of things we've talked about that the Europeans did to the indigenous people. It boggles the mind to think of the psychopathology that can go into this kind of thing. But what clearly happens in these situations is an ideology has been created that these individuals work within that says that those people are less than human. When I was in graduate school, I was a classmate with a man who was on leave from the United States Navy. He was the most high-ranking African-American in the United States Navy. He was a captain, then he became an admiral. And he and I used to talk about the Pequot War, because he was writing on the Pequot War. And he got very emotional, talking about what the Puritans had done to the Indians and how they had dehumanized them in order to kill them, because, he said, that's what he had done. As a naval officer in Vietnam, commanding a fleet of ships that were shelling villages all up and down the coast of Vietnam, not knowing who they're killing. They're killing babies, they're killing women, they're killing old people, they're killing civilians. They don't care. He doesn't care. He said, I never even thought about their lives because they were just gooks. They were just dehumanized things. If I'd ever could have seen what I was doing and thought of them as human beings, I couldn't live with myself for it. But I had been trained to dehumanize them, and so I did. And that's exactly what happens over and over again. It's what's happening in Kosovo, it's what's happened in Cambodia, it happened in Rwanda, it happened in Nazi Germany, and it happened here in California and across the whole continent.
And it wasn't just the native people who were being really annihilated in some of this. You know, claim jumpers, you shoot a claim jumper. So that happened a lot in the gold area. Sometimes the white people would be killing white people. If somebody just walked on their land, they claimed. So there was a lot of other killing going on too. So killing was terrible. One ploy, one thing that they would do to, I don't know, make them feel better or something. If some new person, for instance, would move in or near Round Valley, American, where they may go over and burn his house down. And then they leave bows and arrows there, which is an indication that the Indians attacked this settler, which gave them better excuse to go down the reservation and just start killing at random. Killing is somehow a disease, I think. If you start killing, maybe you can't stop. You know, like a dog starts killing chicken. I don't think you can stop that dog from killing chickens anymore. You got to do something to the dog or get rid of the chicken. But basically, I think that thing gets in human beings too. A very evil spirit invades, becomes paramount. It takes over.
One of the deal about the government too, to send all the children away to government schools so they could lose their culture, lose their language, and that's what they did. Most of those that went to these schools lost the language, and when they came back, they could hardly talk or didn't even know it anymore because they were too young.
And not only that, when you're restricted, your lifestyle's changing, you're restricted. You can't go hunting. You're not supposed to go walking in the mountains. You're not supposed to go gather any food. You're not supposed to cross a white man's field out here to go get some medicine to go have your ceremony. Or you're not supposed to do it. You get no trespassing everywhere. Causes you to your whole spirit to atrophy. When your spirit atrophies, it gives up on your body, and your body deteriorates, and it turns very soft. And instead of running and climbing mountains and hunting and fishing and making baskets and gathering material, things like that, people are basically watch television sometimes and sometimes have a job, and a lot of times not have a job, but continue that very poor diet because we're left out of the economy. We're left out of the economy chain. We're not supposed to have anything. We're not supposed to appreciate anything. We're not supposed to love each other. We're not supposed to have emotions. We're not supposed to, these things aren't supposed to, we're not supposed to have tender feelings. We're not supposed to have those things. We're supposed to be savage. We're supposed to be crude. We're supposed to be like a caveman mentality. And that's what they keep telling us. They keep telling our children. That's why I work with children. That's why you work with children. Because we've got to get that out of the textbooks, get that out of their thinking, get that out of their heart, and get that out of their mind, because their mind is very powerful.
I think it's real bad for all of us, all of you in this room, to see yourselves as victims of history. Once you put the mantle of victim on, you become helpless, and that's exactly the way the government has liked us. The reason they're so damn upset about the casinos is that suddenly you get Indians with money, and everybody's upset because they're so much more attractive when they're poor and helpless and dependent.
Remember Andrew Jackson? He said, annihilate the Indian from the face of the earth. See, but we're still here. We're so persistent. But that's what happened.
You cannot kill a people.
No,
spirit.
because
the spirit, the will to live is there.
And when they said we want you to assimilate into the dominant society, we can't, because we have our own ways. We have our own religion. We can't join them. We can learn their language and do whatever they do, but we can't become a part of them. It's impossible.
Everybody has an umbilical cord attached to their mother, but you also have a spiritual umbilical cord, the ehlo. The ehlo attaches from where your belly button is to the center of the earth, to the center of the universe, and that's exactly where you're supposed to be, according to your ehlo. So they have this very strong ehlo. You could stretch it, but you couldn't break it.
I think the beautiful part of my history is, yes, my elders knew what they lost. They lost their homelands, they lost their culture, they lost their language, and everything they possibly ever dreamed of was gone. But yet they held on to the hope and believe that someday for their children, their grandchildren, their great-great-grandchildren, not yet born, there would be a better time, that the culture and everything that they lost would come back around and return. They believed in these things wholeheartedly. And I'm fortunate enough to see a small part of this come to pass and come true. That I have this heritage to pass down to the young people that I work with. So it's beautiful. And even what's happening right now, sitting in front of this camera, we'll be able to reach out to people in the far, dark areas of the world. And to be able to record the life and history of our elders. It's a beautiful prophecy that's coming to pass. And once again, Floyd, thank you for this opportunity.
One of the final acts of the Holocaust against Indians in the California story was the 1863 roundup and death march to the largest concentration camp in California, the Round Valley Reservation. Located in Northern California, this concentration camp was created to hold several Indian nations. They were the Yuki, Conkalmaidu, Little Lake, and other Pomo, Nome Lackey, Cahote, Wailaki, and Pitt River. Whenever an Indian killed a white settler or miner, it created an excuse for militias to go down to the reservation and shoot any amount of Indians, including elders, women, and children, as retribution. This happened so often that Round Valley became known as the abattoir or the slaughter area. This overview is a contemporary picture of how the Holocaust still exists today. Indians have been decimated throughout history. They were left to languish in concentration camps while the rest of the country grew and prospered. Indians were being written off as roadkill cultures of manifest destiny. Before living in concentration camps, Indians had a perfect diet. In the concentration camps, they were forced to survive on government subsidies of flour, lard, sugar, salt, and canned meats. Often these meat products were contaminated. As a result of that diet, diabetes is prevalent in most Indian nations today. Today, Indians live with many forms of institutional racism. The movie industry continues to ridicule and stereotype Indians and their culture. While movies that denigrate African Americans and Hispanics are no longer there, those depicting Indian stereotypes can still be seen daily on television. This becomes a type of residual Holocaust that we live with today. Another form of residual Holocaust is racism in sports. Racism exists in all levels of sports today in their use of mascots. While there are no teams called Pittsburgh Negroes or New Jersey Jews, Indian people have to live with Washington Redskins, Cleveland Indians, Arcadia Apaches, and their insulting caricatures. Indians are further ignored as the rightful owners of this country. Having lost their culture and land, much like the victims of the Jewish Holocaust, Indians have lost their land and culture through the ruthless dominating efforts of America in the name of God, freedom, and democracy. Who will speak for the rightful owners of this land? When America goes to war with the nation and is victorious, it implements plans to help rebuild those defeated nations. Who will help rebuild the Indian nations that have been decimated and continue to exist in their present conditions? There is a moral challenge to the civilized world to address the issue of land and cultural retrieval for Indian people. There is a healing that needs to take place in America. America needs to heal from its violent past, or it will continue as it does today. In the aftermath of the Nazi Holocaust and World War II, German political leaders, military officers, and the German people were put on trial before the Nuremberg Tribunal. All were charged with war crimes, high crimes against humanity, and genocide, and all proclaimed their innocence. Military officers said they were only following orders. Political leaders and the German people proclaimed innocence by saying they had no idea what was going on in the concentration camps. To their protests of innocence, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who was the chief U.S. prosecutor at Nuremberg, responded to their protests of innocence by saying, "Certain acts and violations of treaties are crimes. They are crimes whether Germany commits them or whether the United States commits them. We are not prepared to impose a code of criminal conduct against others that we would not be willing to have invoked against us."